Welcome to the SDG Media Zone at the United Nations High-Level Political Forum. I'm Enrique Acevedo from 60 Minutes and CBS News. And today, as the UN launches its latest progress report on the Sustainable Development Goals, we will be talking to leading private and public sector experts on the role of geospatial data and data visualization to advance the Sustainable Development Goals equally across the globe. Based on this powerful premise, the UN Statistics Division, the Kellogg Foundation, ESRI, and the Public Foundation are announcing this week they have joined forces to form the SDG Data Alliance. This is in order to support, track, and visualize developing countries' progress on SDGs. Today, we will talk to Alex Cantab from the Kellogg Foundation, Charles Brigham from ESRI, and Greg Scott from the UN Statistics Division about how data can be used for good. Data for good, that's the name of our session. And I'll start with you, Alex Cantab, Program Officer for Latin America and the Caribbean at the Kellogg Foundation, with a very simple question. And I just want to know what attracted you and the Kellogg Foundation to this data initiative. Good morning.
Good morning, Enrique, and thank you so much. And it's a pleasure to be here with all of you. You know, and I think when you look at the Kellogg Foundation, we have a 90-year history of really trying to help create conditions for vulnerable children to thrive. So this is really core to our DNA in terms of engaging with communities, addressing issues of equity. And what we see, right, and of course, the relationship and the partnership with ESRI, the UN, and the Public Foundation is really in alignment with our view, how we approach issues, right? Cooperative planning and group actions. But more importantly is the issue of equity, right? Many of the countries that are behind in the SDGs, right? Whether they're behind because of lack of infrastructure, whether they're behind because of lack of technology or lack of leadership. Those are the countries where we're most concerned about, and this is where we work. So what interested us is how do we address that issue of equity? Because at the bottom of it, right, unless we address these issues of equity, social, political, and economic development will be difficult, right? When you look at, again, you look at some of the issues, I'm sure Greg and Charles have seen this, the equity gap has increased globally, right? The richest countries controlling the resources. We're seeing less political freedom based on some of these reports. So for us, it is the issue of equity, right? How do we make sure that, you know, children in countries like, you know, Haiti, Brazil, Mexico, West Africa are not left behind once more? So that's really the key for us, Enrique, is the issue of equity. And also Alex, community engagement.
Okay.
That the voice of communities are present.
I was going to ask you, because you're talking about the equity gap, and you're already working in the most unequal region in the world, Latin America and the Caribbean, and that has only been exacerbated by the effects of the pandemic. So how important is the moment in terms of, now that we're trying to use data to quantify the progress on SDGs, to have this hurdle along the way in the work that you're doing at the Kellogg Foundation?
You know, I think the pandemic, Enrique, yes, exacerbated the issue, but what it did most importantly is unveil the inequities, right? Even when you look at what's happening in terms of the responses, some countries have not administered a single vaccine, right? And then we're seeing the growth of the Delta variant, the Gamma variant, and so on. So, and again, all it does is really accentuates the inequities, whether it's geographic inequity, urban versus rural, whether it's gender inequity, whether it's racial inequity. So that's what we're seeing today, right? And really, and at the core of it, right? I mean, we look at what's happening in Latin America and the Caribbean, what's happening in Africa, what's happening in Asia. People are revolting, right? Gangs and warlords are taking control of places. right? People are rallying behind bandits, right? Because it's almost we're living in a new era of Robin Hood because of the inequities are so huge. And I think what the pandemic does is really highlight what we already suspected was a major issue. And again, going back to the point of data, and I'm sure, Charles and Greg has a lot more information, is how do we know we're making progress, particularly for the most vulnerable?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Greg Scott, the Interregional Advisor for the United Nations Statistics Division, this effort, the Alliance, has been in the works for a while. Can you provide more context, more background on why is it so important for the achievement of the SDGs, especially in underdeveloped countries?
Thanks, Enrique, and it's a real pleasure to be in this conversation today. It's really important. For us and for everyone, supporting developing countries to strengthen their national data systems and really about providing access to timely and reliable data it's actually a specific ambition of the 2030 agenda. It's actually hardwired into the SDGs. And as Alex has already mentioned, the additional setbacks that we're seeing from the COVID-19 pandemic is really exacerbating that need. So as a means to exploit geospatial information, Earth observations, and other data capabilities, and as an opportunity to provide countries with means to implement the SDGs and to measure where progress is or is not actually being made, especially at the local levels, was one of our ambitions very early on. So since 2016, we in Statistics Division have been working with Esri and other partners to develop open SDG data hubs. Now, these data hubs provide a means for countries to access reliable and actionable data to implement the SDGs and, importantly, to be able to report progress. Now, initially, our efforts were to leverage technology and digital transformation, but then more towards evolving what we term as a data ecosystem, a system of systems with data, which Charles will talk a little bit about. So really, it's about how we support countries with enabling technology, with structures, with governance arrangement and processes to help them transform some of their capabilities. So the Alliance, the SDG Data Alliance, is really further extending that previous work on the open SDG data hubs, combining these elements around technology, people, process, and data. And it's also been anchored by a UN-adopted framework, a global framework called the Integrated Geospatial Information Framework, or the IGIF. And through this partnership, it really is a means to enable government and civil society stakeholders, particularly at the local levels, to monitor SDG progress more effectively, using leading geospatial technology and contributing to open data systems. So I'll admit up front, the Alliance is ambitious, but it provides a tangible recipe, opportunity towards equity, towards bridging this divide, this digital divide, making data visible, and translating our global challenges that we have into local actions across all the 17 SDGs, and anchoring that through SDG 10 in particular. So it's a really exciting venture that we're heading towards.
It is, and you make my job easy, Greg, because you were just mentioning Charles Brigham from Esri. And Charles, I want to ask you specifically, I'm very interested as a journalist on the concept of geospatial data and how can it help governments reduce the inequalities that Charles was talking about, and as well as Alex at the beginning of our conversation.
Thank you, Enrique. It's a pleasure to be here again with you all. And I think if you think about what geospatial data is, you and everyone here use spatial thinking in your everyday lives. When you travel, when you move around, you're thinking spatially. That all of that information that you consume is translated into knowledge and wisdom. Geospatial data encapsulates all types of data. It tells us why is what where and why is it there. Maps, abstracting that geospatial data, are a common language. To reduce inequality, we need to utilize that common language. We need to utilize that geospatial data and translate that to knowledge and wisdom. Inequalities in that, such as racial and social inequities, hinder progress. We all know that. We've seen that. They are by far the most difficult to address because they expose the broken fabric of society and are not popular to discuss. Race issues are a good demonstrator, and the development community should take greater note of this issue worldwide. But again, it's not popular. We need to address this head on, not mince words. We need to talk about them in the context of SDG 10 specifically. And there must be progress on SDG 10 for all other SDGs to succeed. And this is coming from the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, who stated this early on in the SDG Progress. So that geospatial knowledge, that spatial thinking, that power that people already have inherent to them to discuss these challenges just needs to be brought out. It's a challenge, but we can face this challenge if we're able to confront these very difficult issues.
And in order to scale this effort, you touched upon this during your answer, but what are some of the other barriers that countries are facing in order to develop the data hubs that help them monitor the status of their progress with the SDGs?
Yeah, let me be really explicit here to answer that question, because that is an extremely valid question and it requires a very specific answer. Technology is, as an Esri employee, is not the answer. It's only part of the puzzle. And we all know technology is largely an enabler to what we want to do generally. There are three main components to achieve success that this SDG Data Alliance is going to undertake. One is around governance. Another is around capacity building and to enable those technology. So a wise man once told me that a burger is a good analogy for explaining complex technology terms around governance and capacity. A burger doesn't taste good without the burger inside. You can eat just the bun, but it doesn't taste good. And you want to have all those things, all those ingredients for this to work. And this is a good analogy to keep it very simple. All those things have to work together for it to prosper, for it to thrive. And the SDG Data Alliance works on all three of these dependencies. And we've learned from previous SDG Data Hub work, such as the BIS for SDGs and other research exercises, if one lacks, another suffers. At the end of the day, Enrique, this is a change management exercise. Change has to happen across government, across staff, across technology. And it's also an innovation challenge, which will require political will and new ways of utilizing all types of data, which GIS does. But this is not well known by traditional economists, the official statistics community, where I've come from, and it's not popular or easy. So we want to make this work to be as easy to adopt as possible, down to the community level, which is our North Star. We must rise to the challenge here of digital transformation, as the UN Secretary General said in his next 5 years of being one of the most grave challenges ahead of us to address digital transformation.
And you just mentioned taking this down to the community level. I want to bring back Alex Cantab, because the initiative is a global effort, correct? But the focus is also on local community engagement. Why is that so important, Alex?
You know, as Charles and Greg were talking, I was thinking of a former, the late Haitian journalist, Jean Casimir. And he used to have a broadcast. And then what he used to say is, if you want to hide the fever, you break the thermometer, right? If you want to hide the fever, you break the thermometer. So I think the SDG Data Alliance is the thermometer. Without that, right, we don't know the extent of inequities in vulnerable places, in the places where we work, Latin America and the Caribbean. Yes, this is a global issue, but at the end of the day, it lands in communities. It is about people, it is about children, the families who live in communities, right? So yes, it is a global issue, but I think the SDG Data Alliance is the thermometer. We need to understand the extent of the issue, particularly with SDG 10, right? Gender, racial, and economic inequalities and inequities. So this is really for us, yes, again, is a global issue, but the impact is in communities.
Now, and bringing citizens, engaging with citizens seems to be also a key factor here. Charles, you were just talking about this not being something that's popular or easy, and you want to make sure that it's accessible to everyone, easy and popular, I guess. How do you manage to engage citizens with these data hubs and make sense of all the information?
Yeah, to bring that to perspective, we started doing work on open data a decade ago, and we started to produce open data technologies and enablement capabilities for governments, communities, all of our millions of users. And what we realized really quickly is that just publishing open data on a website or elsewhere is not good enough. You need to make that data meaningful, engaging. And so in this work, in the SDG Data Alliance, we're working on such templates to do so, to expose open data. And that's part of why the word hub is in this effort. The hub capabilities that we're bringing to this are making data meaningful. They're an extension of open data. So within this work, we're taking an open, interoperable, standards-based systems of systems approach to federate data. Now, what does that mean? Well, sadly, the analogy for that is COVID here. The Johns Hopkins COVID dashboard, COVID hub, received at its height 1 billion hits a day, and it received significant media attention. A lot of people went there as a go-to resource to understand the global context of COVID-19. That same approach, technology infrastructure, and pattern is being used within the SDG Data Alliance Data Hub efforts. And we have tested this in previous SDG Data Hubs as well. So we know this works, but we have to have meaningful data. And that is why we see key SDGs such as SDG 10 bringing that required attention, the IGIF bringing the governance, Kellogg bringing the capacity, but critically the equity expertise, and Esri bringing the technology and training, along with future partners and others that want to be included in this work.
Yeah, well, Greg, I think that's a perfect gateway into my next question, because we have the philanthropic sector, the private sector, of course, you have the United Nations. I think we're missing the media in this partnership, but why do you think that this partnership, a partnership like this can be successful in terms of creating these data hubs, Greg?
Yeah, thanks, Enrique. It's a really important question, and we've heard partners mentioned several times already. And fortunately, we're in a really good place because, just for context, the 2030 agenda itself is really anchored by the premise that all countries and all stakeholders will work together and they'll be working in partnership. And this is kind of why partnerships is one of the 5 defining pillars of the 2030 agenda, and about how we encourage and promote effective partnerships. And so we've done that. And one of the strategic pathways of the IGIF is partnerships itself. So an important premise to achieve an integrated geospatial information capability for countries, whether they're developing or developed, is first to be able to establish the value of geospatial information through a culture of inclusion, trusted partnerships, and strategic alliances. And this is what we have. Partnerships, they recognize many common needs. They're aspirational, they have goals, and it's about achieving national priorities and outcomes. And Alex has defined a number of those for countries. Key ingredients, 2 key ingredients that we've learned: leadership and champions. These are really the foundation for success in the partnership, whether it be public, private, other organizations, it's really critical to have that leadership. So as many countries continue to face some of these obstacles and have struggles in their development, in their economic and social prosperity, in their equity challenges, leveraging a community of like-minded stakeholders and organizations provides that resource, that capacity, and that development. And so with this data alliance and with the partners we have through Public Foundation, WK Kellogg and Esri, combined with all these enabling tools and frameworks to support the SDGs in general, but SDG 10 in particular, really shares our shared purpose and really typifies the strength in partnerships, which I think is often not really understood or recognized. It's like the number of pieces is much greater than the whole. And that's why we're really excited to be part of this important process.
Yeah, absolutely. And just final question to you, Greg. The UN is annually collecting and reporting on the SDG progress. How do we make this process more efficient, or in the words of Charles, more meaningful and engaging?
Yes, that's true. So you know, we all know that the SDGs at the moment provide this overarching development framework, but critically, they need to be visible to citizens. And so the annual SDG Progress Report brings together the latest data to give us what I would term as a global snapshot of progress. Today, as we sit here in the middle of the pandemic, that progress we know remains uneven. We know it's not on track, and we know that it's been significantly impacted by the pandemic. Nonetheless, progress is being made. But importantly, we're seeing data gaps that remain in terms of how we report progress. It's intrinsically a necessity to have good data to make good decisions. So what we're seeing that with many of these socioeconomic development and particularly equity and social good challenges are intrinsically tied to what happens where at the local level, as Charles and Alex have already mentioned, at the cities, villages, communities, and citizens themselves. So we have a mantra that we talk about in our global geospatial community is think global, act local, and that mantra applies. So one of the efforts for this alliance is saying, how can we translate the responsibilities of key actors such as national governments into the global vision, but bringing local action at the community level? And so this requires access to reliable and actionable data. Now, we have challenges in that because being able to find data is one of our biggest problems. Does the data even exist? If so, who has it? Is it being shared? Is it being used? In many cases, depending on who you speak to in the different levels of government in the community, those answers are yes, maybe, no, don't know. And we know that this is the prevailing case in many countries around the world. So this is a complex problem, which is why we have difficulties in answering it. And it's really a representation of the development reality on the ground. The real world is immensely diverse and it's complex, but it's also now more and more than ever being digitally represented through many data sources and types from many organizations, often residing, there we say it, in silos around the world, not being shared and definitely far from being reliable and robust. So our data ecosystem requires an enabling environment where organizations can cooperate, coordinate, and improve on how they deal with their data. So we know there's many challenges here, but there's also a lot of opportunity and certainly driven by the realization of the urgent need for data we're seeing today. Bringing it all together is really what we're seeing with this SDG Data Alliance. We have an enabling global framework in the IGIF. We have context with the Open SDG Data Hubs. We now have a data alliance that provides enabling geospatial technologies from Esri, and we have motivation from organizations like WK Kellogg organization. So as we bring all those pieces together, the burger, as Charles said, in terms of how we support countries in the implementation of the SDGs, will then bring a more rigorous approach to how we report on an annual basis at a national level through to the regional and global level. It's really about how we work from the bottom up and how we daisy chain the impact through these processes.